A hoodlum believed he could frighten a palace sentry with menacing words and a fist to the face, but after one calculated blow, he found himself sprawled on the pavement, expelling his own dental work. Here's the complete account of what transpired. Before we proceed, please tell us in the comments section where you're viewing this from. Remember to hit subscribe because at this exact time tomorrow, we'll deliver another remarkable tale showcasing the courage and regimentation of the palace sentries. You wouldn't want to skip it. The blazing summer heat descended mercilessly on Buckingham Palace's courtyard as Marcus Stone pushed his way through the tourist throng. His 6 feet 3 inches frame, toughened by years of street combat rather than regimented training, cast a threatening shadow over families attempting to capture vacation memories. "Get out of the way," he snarled, pushing past a young mother who hadn't removed her children quickly enough. The aroma of low-quality lager and day-old cigarettes trailed behind him, starkly contrasting with the immaculate palace grounds. His knuckles, marked by countless tavern scuffles, unconsciously clenched as he surveyed the area with hunter-like intent. The morning crowd instinctively separated before him, recognizing the familiar tension preceding violence. Marcus's sleeveless shirt revealed arms adorned with rough tattoos, each one evidence of nights spent demonstrating his superiority in alleyway confrontations. His eyes, red from morning hours spent in London's seediest taverns, held the dangerous gleam of someone seeking conflict. "Damned tourists," he spat onto the pristine stonework, his London accent thick with disdain. "Standing around like cattle taking photographs of what?" His gaze moved across the palace walls with the same contemptuous sneer he'd perfected in numerous confrontations. "Just an ornate prison with fancy guards inside it." A cluster of schoolchildren hurried past, their instructor guiding them away from Marcus's intimidating presence. He followed their movement with a harsh chuckle, the sound traveling across the courtyard like shattered glass. "That's right, move along. Teach them early what genuine power resembles." His heavy boots scraped against the courtyard stones as he continued his aggressive patrol of the grounds, each step deliberate as if marking territory. The morning sunlight caught the metal knuckle dusters partially visible in his back pocket, not a fashion statement but a tool he'd used frequently enough to consider an extension of himself. "Watch yourself," he growled at an elderly gentleman who hadn't moved aside quickly enough. The old man's military bearing and quiet dignity only seemed to fuel Marcus's growing agitation. Something about order, respect, and discipline appeared to irritate him like an itch he could only scratch through aggression. That's when Marcus's eyes fixed on the royal guard standing at attention. The guard's flawless posture and spotless uniform represented everything Marcus despised: discipline, authority, earned respect. The morning sun reflected off the guard's brass buttons and medals, somehow deepening Marcus's scowl into something ugly. Well, he drawled, his voice deliberately carrying across the courtyard. "Look what we have here." He began circling the guard like a predator, each step calculated to intimidate. Another one of those decorative soldiers posing prettily for the cameras. The guard remained motionless, but there was something in his bearing, a subtle tension visible only to those who recognized it, that spoke of years of genuine combat experience. His eyes, fixed forward with parade ground precision, had witnessed things Marcus couldn't imagine in his worst bar fights. "Hey, mate," Marcus moved closer, deliberately invading the guard's personal space. The smell of stale beer intensified as he leaned in, his face inches from the guards. "What's wrong? Too posh to answer." His boots scuffed against the courtyard stones as he positioned himself directly before the guard, obstructing tourists' photographs. 2 elderly veterans watching from nearby straightened their postures, their own military bearing evident. One touched his campaign medals unconsciously, recognition flickering in his eyes, not of Marcus's attempted display of power, but of the quiet strength in the guard's disciplined stance. "You believe you're special, don't you?" Marcus continued, his voice rising with each word. "Standing here in your elaborate costume playing soldier while real men engage in actual fighting." He gestured toward his own scarred knuckles, proud badges of street violence that suddenly seemed childish compared to the guard's earned medals. The morning crowd began shifting uncomfortably, recognizing the familiar tension preceding violence. Parents guided their children away while other tourists created a subtle circle of space around the unfolding scene. A palace security officer in the distance had noticed the disturbance and was speaking into his radio, but Marcus was too focused on his target to notice. "What's the matter, soldier boy?" He waved his hand before the guard's face, close enough that his knuckles nearly grazed the brim of the bearskin cap. "Can't speak, can't move, or just frightened?" His laugh was harsh against the dignified backdrop of Buckingham Palace. "Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Hide behind that uniform because you've got nothing else." The guard remained motionless, but there was a change in the atmosphere, subtle but perceptible to those who understood genuine strength. The kind of strength forged in battle, not in bar fights. The kind that didn't need to be proven through petty provocations. "You know what I think?" Marcus spat on the ground near the guard's polished boots, his face contorting with growing rage at being ignored. "I think you're just another pretend soldier who's never even participated in a genuine fight, not like me." He flexed his fingers, muscle memory from countless street brawls making them itch for violence. Perhaps it's time someone demonstrated what a real man can do. The veterans exchanged glances, years of military experience telling them what was coming. They didn't move to intervene, something in the guard's bearing told them he needed no protection, but they remained close, silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Marcus's face had darkened to an ugly shade of crimson, his ego wounded by the guard's continued silence. He began bouncing on the balls of his feet, a boxer's stance that spoke more of back alley brawls than trained discipline. "Listen up, everyone," he announced to the growing crowd, his voice carrying the desperate edge of a man who'd exhausted his patience. "Your fancy guard here is about to learn what happens when you disregard the wrong bloke." His fingers curled into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening with barely contained rage. The guard remained at attention, but there was something lethal in his stillness now, like a coiled spring under perfect control. His parade ground stance concealed years of combat training. The morning sun illuminated his campaign medals, ribbons that spoke of conflicts in distant lands where the stakes exceeded a thug's injured pride. "Final chance, soldier boy." Marcus circled closer, his movements becoming more predatory with each step. "Show me something, a blink, a twitch, anything." Sweat had begun forming on his forehead, whether from the summer heat or growing frustration was difficult to determine. "Or are you just going to stand there and accept what's coming?" The older veteran shifted his weight, recognition flickering in his eyes. He'd observed that stance before in places where combat wasn't a game and consequences were measured in blood. The guard's stillness wasn't the rigid posture of ceremony anymore, it was the calculated patience of a predator allowing its prey to move into position. "You believe that uniform protects you?" Marcus's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Think those medals make you exceptional?" His right hand clenched and unclenched rhythmically, a tell that any trained fighter would have recognized. "Let's see how exceptional you feel with a few teeth missing." The crowd had expanded now, drawn by the building tension. Some had phones raised, but most stood in uncomfortable silence, witnessing the prelude to violence they sensed was approaching. A young boy tugged at his father's sleeve, asking in a whispered voice why the bad man was being so cruel. The father didn't respond, his own expression tight with concern. Marcus rolled his shoulders, the motion rippling through his tank top like a wave of barely contained violence. "Time's up, soldier." His feet shifted into a wider stance, telegraphing his intentions to everyone except himself. "Let's see what they teach you in guard school about, His words cut off as he pulled back his fist, the movement telegraphed like a novice's mistake. The guard hadn't moved, hadn't even blinked, but somehow his stillness seemed to have assumed a different quality, less ceremonial, more tactical. Anyone with genuine combat experience would have recognized the subtle shift in his weight, the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders that spoke of trained reflexes waiting to be unleashed. Marcus's fist flew through the air with all the finesse of a pub brawler, telegraphed widely and powered more by anger than technique. The punch connected with the guard's jaw in a moment that appeared to freeze time, the impact echoing across the suddenly silent courtyard. The guard's head snapped to the side, more from the natural absorption of the blow than any real damage. His bearskin cap didn't even move, secured by a chin strap that had experienced far worse than a street thug's attempt at violence. A single drop of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, bright red against his composed features. "Ha!" Marcus crowed, shaking out his hand with a grimace that revealed the pain of striking something far more solid than he'd anticipated. Not so exceptional now, are you? His voice carried a desperate edge of triumph, like a man trying to convince himself he'd achieved something meaningful. The guard's head slowly returned to its forward position, his movement so deliberate it seemed mechanical. The blood droplet tracked down his chin, staining the pristine white of his collar strap with a single crimson spot. His eyes, which had remained fixed forward throughout the assault, suddenly shifted to lock onto Marcus's face. The change was subtle but profound. Gone was the ceremonial statue, replaced by something that made the watching veterans take an instinctive step backward. They recognized that look. They'd seen it in places where combat wasn't a game, where men like Marcus were considered little more than annoying gnats to be swatted. "That all you've got?" Marcus taunted, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Something about the guard's reaction, or lack thereof, had thrown him off balance. This wasn't how it was supposed to unfold. People were supposed to collapse when he struck them, supposed to display fear or at least pain. The guard's composure was like a mirror reflecting all of Marcus's inadequacies back at him. The crowd had gone deathly quiet. Parents shielded their children's eyes, tourists lowered their phones, and even the birds seemed to suspend their song. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard, transforming the scene into a tableau of mismatched opponents, one fueled by cheap beer and misplaced anger, the other forged in the fires of genuine combat. Blood continued tracking down the guard's chin, but his expression remained unchanged. If anything, his posture seemed to have become more refined, more precise, as if the punch had simply reminded him of standards learned in places where violence held real consequence. The single red drop fell from his chin, landing with perfect precision on his brass button where it caught the sunlight like a ruby. Marcus's moment of triumph was already souring, transforming to confusion and then renewed anger as he realized his best shot had accomplished nothing more than decorating the guard's uniform with a single blood droplet. His fists clenched again, muscles bunching as he prepared to throw another punch, to prove to himself and his audience that he remained in control. That's when the guard spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had confronted far worse than barroom bullies. The words that emerged from his mouth would change everything. "You strike like a woman." The guard's voice sliced through the tension, each word precisely measured and delivered with the calm certainty of someone stating an obvious fact. His eyes hadn't moved from Marcus's face, but now they carried an intensity that made the bully take an involuntary step backward. The guard's posture shifted subtly, not breaking protocol but adjusting it to accommodate what was about to occur. "I could have prevented that punch before it left your shoulder." His voice carried the weight of experience, not boasting but simple truth. "Saw it coming from the moment you began posturing, amateur form, predictable angle, all power and no technique." Marcus's face flushed darker, but something kept him rooted to the spot. Perhaps it was the guard's eyes that had witnessed real combat, real consequences, real death. "You're lying," he managed, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "You just stood there and received it like a trained soldier." The guard's voice remained measured, but there was steel beneath the composure now. "Let me explain something to you about authentic combat, son. While you were practicing your pub brawls, I was in Helmand province watching RPGs tear through armored vehicles. While you were picking fights with drunks, I was carrying wounded comrades through sniper fire." The veterans nearby nodded slowly, recognition in their eyes. They knew that tone, the voice of someone who had seen the world's darkest corners and returned carrying burdens that thugs like Marcus couldn't comprehend. "That punch," the guard continued, the blood on his collar now dried to a dark stain, "I've endured worse hits from children in war zones. Your street fighting means nothing to someone who's had to hold a friend's arteries closed while waiting for medical evacuation. Your attempts at intimidation." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, making the dried blood crack slightly. "I've stared down suicide bombers with more conviction than you'll ever possess." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the guard wasn't finished. "Protocol dictates that we maintain our post, display discipline, embody the traditions we represent. So I let your punch land, chose to take it because compared to incoming mortar fire, compared to the sound of bullets hitting sand inches from your head, compared to watching brothers in arms fall," he paused, his eyes boring into Marcus's soul. "Compared to genuine combat, you're nothing but a child throwing a tantrum." The crowd had drawn closer now, pulled in by the quiet authority in the guard's voice. The morning sun seemed to intensify, casting the scene in stark relief, Marcus's swagger now appearing hollow against the guard's earned confidence. "But you see," the guard's voice dropped lower, carrying an edge that made several onlookers step back. "While protocol dictates our general conduct, it also permits appropriate response to direct physical assault. And since you seem incapable of understanding anything but violence." His eyes flickered to Marcus's bruised knuckles, then back to his face. "Perhaps it's time I demonstrated what a real soldier can do." The guard's next movement was so subtle it was almost invisible, just a slight shift in his stance, a minimal adjustment of his weight. But to the veterans watching, it spoke volumes. They'd observed that preparation before, in moments before lightning struck, in the calm before a storm that would reshape the landscape. "You wanted my attention," the guard's voice carried absolute certainty now. "Congratulations, you have it. Now let me show you the difference between your playground posturing and what happens when you provoke someone who's witnessed genuine war." Marcus felt it then, real fear, perhaps for the first time in his life. But it was too late. The guard's next movement would redefine his understanding of power, strength, and the consequences of disrespect. The guard's punch was nothing like Marcus's wild haymaker. It was precision incarnate, a masterpiece of kinetic energy delivered with military efficiency. The movement began not from the shoulder but from the ground up, power transferring through perfectly positioned feet, through legs hardened by years of standing guard, through a core strengthened by combat gear and battlefield maneuvers. Time seemed to decelerate as the guard's white-gloved fist traveled its inevitable path. There was no wasted motion, no telegraph, no amateur tells, just pure disciplined violence channeled through years of professional training. The kind of punch that combat instructors used as teaching examples, that battlefield veterans recognized as the difference between fighting and merely brawling. The impact was devastating. The sound of knuckles meeting jaw echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot, followed by the distinct crack of dental work yielding. Marcus's head snapped back with such force that flecks of blood and tooth fragments scattered in an arc through the morning air, catching the sunlight like macabre diamonds before pattering against the courtyard stones. He staggered backward, his legs immediately forgetting all their street fighting stance. Blood poured from his mouth, mixing with the saliva he could no longer contain. Two broken teeth skittered across the ground, coming to rest near the feet of horrified tourists. His hand flew to his face, fingers probing the new gaps in his smile as his eyes widened with shock and pain. "That," the guard's voice carried the same measured tone, his posture already returned to textbook perfection, "is how a soldier throws a punch. Notice the difference." He hadn't even taken a full step from his post. The entire devastating counterstrike had been delivered with minimum deviation from protocol. Marcus tried to speak, but all that emerged was a wet gurgling sound. Blood dribbled down his chin, staining his tank top. His attempts at words transformed into a series of unintelligible grunts, each one sending fresh crimson droplets to join the growing stain on his chest. Trying to say something, the guard's question carried no mockery, just the professional interest of someone evaluating the effectiveness of their technique. "I'm afraid that might be difficult for a while. Your dental work appears to need significant attention." The veterans watching nodded in grim approval. They recognized the technique, not the showy violence of action movies or street brawls, but the efficient brutality taught to those who might need to end fights quickly in hostile territory. One strike, precisely delivered with just enough force to neutralize without killing. Marcus swayed on his feet, his bravado replaced by confused pain. Each attempt at speech produced only mumbled gibberish, made worse by the blood and saliva he couldn't control. The man who had been so eager to demonstrate his toughness now stood drooling like a child, his attempts at maintaining dignity made impossible by his body's involuntary responses to trauma. "If you're wondering about the specific damage," the guard continued, his voice carrying the clinical tone of a combat medic, "that was a textbook orbital strike targeting the mandibular nerve cluster. We learn it not for ceremony but for combat effectiveness. The same technique that's dropped terrorists in Baghdad tends to work equally well on overconfident civilians." Blood continued to drip from Marcus's mouth, creating a small puddle at his feet. His attempts to maintain his tough guy image were now painfully pathetic, each mumbled attempt at speech sending fresh rivulets of red down his chin, each try at standing straight undermined by the shock still reverberating through his system. "I'd suggest seeking immediate medical attention," the guard advised, his posture once again perfectly aligned with ceremonial standards. The human jaw contains several vital nerve clusters that when properly engaged can cause significant trauma. You'll find St. Mary's Hospital has an excellent dental surgery department. Marcus managed one final unintelligible attempt at speech before his legs finally gave way. He collapsed to his knees, hands still clutching his shattered jaw, pride lying in pieces around him like his scattered teeth on the courtyard stones. The man who had arrived full of swagger and certainty now knelt in a growing puddle of his own blood, unable to even curse his humiliation properly. 2 police officers had arrived, their faces professionally neutral despite the scene before them. Blood still dripped steadily from Marcus's mouth as they helped him to his feet, his attempts to resist their assistance resulting only in more unintelligible sounds and fresh crimson spatters on his chest. Marcus's attempts at protest came out as wet gurgling noises. Each try at speech sent fresh waves of pain through his shattered jaw, causing more blood to dribble down his chin. The tough street fighter who had arrived throwing his weight around was now reduced to making sounds like a toddler learning to talk. The guard had already resumed his post, his posture perfect once more. The only evidence of the altercation was a small blood stain on his white collar strap and the slightly reddened knuckle of his glove, both of which somehow made his bearing even more intimidating. His eyes had returned to their forward focus, as if the entire incident had been nothing more than a minor interruption in his duties. "Get him to medical," one officer instructed his partner, eyeing the trail of blood drops Marcus was leaving on the courtyard stones. "St. Mary's should be able to handle facial trauma of this magnitude." He turned to the guard, nodding with professional respect. "We'll need a statement later, but I believe we all saw this was clearly self-defense." Marcus made another attempt at speech, perhaps trying to argue, but all that emerged was a weak NNGH followed by more blood and drool. His eyes, now wide with pain and humiliation, darted between the guard and the growing puddle of red at his feet. The man who had arrived full of aggressive energy now couldn't even manage a coherent curse. The older veteran approached the officers, his campaign medals catching the morning sun. "If you need witnesses," he offered, "there are several of us who saw everything." The guard showed remarkable restraint, all things considered. His companion nodded in agreement, both men carrying the bearing of those who understood the difference between necessary force and excessive violence. As the police began leading Marcus away, his awkward stumbling a far cry from his earlier swagger, the guard's voice carried across the courtyard one final time. "Remember this moment," he said, his tone carrying neither victory nor vindictiveness, just professional observation. "Every drop of blood you're expelling, every tooth you're leaving behind, they're teaching you something about genuine strength that your street fights never could." Marcus's only response was another wet gurgle, his earlier bravado drowned in blood and saliva. The tough guy act had quite literally been knocked out of him, replaced by the pitiful spectacle of a man who could no longer even curse his own humiliation properly. The crowd began to disperse, parents leading their children away while quietly explaining that violence, while sometimes necessary, was never the first solution to seek. The veterans lingered a moment longer, exchanging knowing looks before departing. They understood that what they had witnessed wasn't just a fight, it was a lesson in the difference between true strength and false bravado, delivered in the only language a bully could comprehend. Blood stains dried slowly on the ancient stones of Buckingham Palace as the morning crowd resumed its normal flow. The guard stood at his post exactly as he had before Marcus's arrival, his bearing carrying the same dignity but now tinged with something else, a reminder that beneath the ceremonial exterior lay warriors forged in real combat. The crimson drops Marcus had left behind began to darken against the pale stones like full stops punctuating the end of his lesson. His teeth, scattered during the guard's precise strike, were collected as evidence by the police, though no charges would be filed. After all, how could Marcus press charges when he couldn't even speak coherently enough to give a statement? The guard's white glove, slightly stained at the knuckle, would be replaced during the next changing of the guard, the only concession to the morning's violence. The small blood stain on his collar would be cleaned, his uniform restored to pristine condition, as if washing away the last traces of a lesson that had needed to be taught. But there would be no redemption story here, no moment of realization for Marcus, no sudden understanding of respect or tradition. Some people, it seemed, could only learn through pain, and even then the lesson might not take. His shattered jaw would heal eventually, new teeth would replace the old, but the humiliation of being reduced to infantile gurgling would linger far longer than any physical wound. The guard remained at his post as the sun climbed higher, his shadow stretching across the stones where Marcus's blood still dried. He stood as he always had, as others would after him, a living reminder that true strength lay not in the ability to inflict violence, but in the discipline to control it, and the wisdom to know when that control must be set aside. What would you have done in the guard's position? While violence should never be the first answer, sometimes it becomes the only language certain people understand. When confronted with bullies who mistake restraint for weakness, is there a point where physical response becomes not just justified but necessary? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you witnessed moments where someone learned the hard way that ceremony doesn't equal weakness? Tell us your story. And if this account of justice served resonated with you, make sure to join our community of like-minded individuals who respect tradition and understand true strength. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of those who stand guard over our values and what happens to those who test their limits.